hardest part is figuring out what you want to master.
Focus on your product.
Can you tell somebody that they suck?
You got to just go, this is exactly what I want to do for a living.
You can't even tell somebody that their breath is fit life.
Josh, thank you, man. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for making this happen.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. And you got luggage in the corner. You're literally, how long have you been in LA? Like 24 hours?
About that, yeah.
And then where do you go from here?
San Francisco for a couple of days, home for a couple of days, and back on the road. My life, I never thought this would be my life.
Yeah.
Of like on the road the entire time, but it is what it is. Yeah.
Have you learned to enjoy it, or is it just kind of is what it is, or?
It's amazing, and you got to appreciate the amazing parts of it and in between. And honestly, the only part of it that is really tough is, so I have two kids. My daughter is 6.5. My son is almost 4.
Yeah.
And they, and particularly she, 100% knows when I'm gone, how many days I'm gone.
Yeah.
Like, so that becomes the hard part. But it's like you have these moments of just like interspersed craziness, and you have like 12 minutes of just yesterday I ended up at the James Corden taping with 50 Cent and Ariana Grande backstage, like hanging out and it was a totally random thing that happened. And then like that's what yesterday was like. You know, you have that like 10 minutes of like craziness, and then you have 23 hours and 50 minutes of like just like boredom and but
sitting in
it
an
is
airport,
what it is, right?
Yeah.
So.
Man, and have you adjusted well to, like you said that you didn't expect your life would be this way? Do you feel like you've adjusted well? Do you have moments of, do you have any like anxiety? You have any of that stuff?
No, I mean, at the core today, I'm a salesman, right? I'm the salesman for StockX, and whomever I'm talking to, whether it's I get to do a lot of press and a lot of conversations like this. Yeah. I do a lot of public speaking. Talking to brands, talking to business partners, it's all in some form of selling StockX and being, and that's the fun part and we'll get into a lot of details, but like people know us as, a sneaker marketplace and streetwear, but it's about the bigger idea, and it's a super exciting thing. And frankly, I'm super, honored to be able to be the one to go out and talk about this thing, which is truly revolutionary, like at some level, and it's just exciting and it's fun. Yeah. And particularly the more that I do it, the more that you see the reaction from the people that start to understand, like, oh, like this isn't about like beating like Flight Club, this is about beating Amazon. Yeah. And that level of like just discussion is pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I don't want to mess up the flow of this. What is the bigger thing? When you say it's all about feeding the bigger...
we have to come back to that in 40 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be like, all right, well, so where did you grow up?
No, it's... it all dovetails together. Yeah. So at the highest level, the reason that this business has been successful is it's about this model. It's about we've taken the way the stock market works and created a consumer goods marketplace for it. So we're an evolution of eBay, right? All we do is connect buyers and sellers who want to buy and sell stuff. Yeah. But the way that we do that, the way that we connect buyers and sellers, is the exact same way that the world's stock markets connect buyers and sellers. And there's a lot of nuance to that, and there's a lot of data, and we can get into some of the details. Yeah. But like the exciting part is that we didn't make this up. The stock market has been the most efficient form of commerce for 200 years. Yeah. And all we did was point it from these commodities, from stocks and bonds and oil and gas, to new commodities, to sneakers and streetwear and watches and handbags and all that. Yeah. And that's a really interesting thing about like this, is that like all we're trying to do is just sort of like mimic what has been a super successful model for connecting people and use it for something else. And it works. It works really well so far, and we still have a long way to go. But like that's the high level like viewpoint on it.
And so obviously, when you're talking about that, you're talking about all of the how is that the way that it serves you shoes and tells you most popular and highest bid and most recent bid and all of those formulas. Is that kind of
the core of it is it's what's called a live bid ask model. So as opposed to say eBay, where someone just puts up a shoe and everyone bids on it. Yep. You have a bid-ask model where buyers are placing bids and sellers are placing asks, and it's all around a single product page. Like that's the key. It's about standardization. If you go buy a share of Nike stock from the New York Stock Exchange, there's not thousands of people saying, "Hey, buy my Nike stock. Buy my Nike stock. Here's a picture of mine. Mine comes with a cat." Like what? There's one ticker symbol for Nike, and everything happens at that one place, and that's what creates all the efficiencies. And so if you go to eBay, right, and you search for those shoes or these shoes, you'll get 1,000 listings, 2,000 listings, and you buy from this guy, buy from that guy. But on StockX, there's one product page for that shoe and one product page for this shoe. And by bringing it all at that one place, then you can leverage all of the data and the efficiencies of how the stock market works. Yeah. It's about that single asset, and that's really a super powerful part of it.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Because I always thought that was such a cool part of it, but I didn't realize, I guess I underestimated the power of what that really is. And you guys are the only one. That's obviously your proprietary. Do any of the other platforms even use a similar model?
There's a lot of, we have competition in every category.
Yeah.
And in sneakers and streetwear, I think we're the largest. There's a couple close players. In watches and handbags, we're not. There's definitely marketplaces that are larger. And they all the good ones use some pieces of it, right? So one of the parts that we do is we authenticate all the products. Yeah. There's a lot of value in not getting a fake product, but for us, it's about standardization. Authentication is just one piece of standardization, which goes to the larger model. Yeah. So there's other people that authenticate, and there's a lot of value around that, right? Yeah. So that's what's been interesting is we have competition on the products for sure, and we sell some of those highly coveted products in the world. So that's natural. But so far, we don't have any direct competitors on the model that have gone that deep to create it. Yeah. And we'll see, and maybe we will, maybe we won't, but like that's the real value. But I think it's super interesting what you said is you're sort of like a very similar reaction I get a lot of people, which is like, oh, I didn't realize that it was the bigger part of it. And that's okay, right? Yeah. The whole challenge for us when we started this business, and we can go back and talk about how I ended up starting this business with Dan Gilbert. Yeah. But the whole challenge was, all right, the stock market has been super efficient. The hypothesis is sound that this is how things should work. The question is, can we create a website? Can we create a consumer goods marketplace where 14-year-old kids can come and buy and sell sneakers, and they don't have to know the theory behind a stock market? They don't have to know what a bidder and ask is. Yeah. Like if I have to teach 14-year-old kids about the stock market, like I was probably in a lot of trouble, right? Yeah. And so that was the thing, and that was the challenge to like our product team and design team. Like, can we create an experience where we leverage all these mechanics, but like I don't have to sit here and like be in an economics class? Yeah.
And that's actually, what I'm saying is actually a compliment. I know you didn't take it as a diss, but I'm saying because it's woven in so seamlessly that you don't even notice that that's really what's happening. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's cool to watch those things, and obviously you see how much easier the bid and ask system works than other platforms, but I guess it's just so seamlessly woven in there that you don't even realize how easy it's making it. And for some reason, obviously, I'm relatively into sneakers. I've looked at all the different platforms, and I'm not saying this because you're here. StockX is the one that I use because it just, for some reason, felt better. And, I had no loyalty to anyone. I don't know anyone at StockX, but that really, for some reason, the platform felt better, and that's probably a huge reason why.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's a huge testament to like our design and product team, right? Yeah. And I take zero credit for that. Is that I'm if you split it up, I'm on the brand data content, creative side of the business, and our third co-founder, a guy named Greg Schwartz, who's our COO. And third co-founder with Dan and I, and Greg and I kind of co-run the company. Yep. And that's, that was a big testament to those guys to create a product that could do that. And, and look, maybe this is an interesting thing. Maybe it's really good and maybe we have succeeded because of that design, or maybe people just want Yeezy so bad, it doesn't matter, right? They'll jump over their mother to get a pair. So I don't know, who knows? But like, we're pretty good right now. So hopefully, we like that.
And like you mentioned Amazon slightly, like is the way that you see it, is this a platform that will sell all kinds of different products? Is that where it's headed, or is it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, the tagline from day one was always stock market of things. Yep. And we don't use it so much in a lot of the marketing because I can't go up to someone on the street and be like, hey, you should buy a handbag from us because we're the stock market of things. Like that doesn't mean anything. But like that's always like, for us at least, has been a sort of guiding principle of this. Like it's called StockX, not SneakerX, right? It was never about just sneakers. It was always about like all the different products that this could apply to. And by the way, like the eBay and Amazon models will still continue to exist and thrive, and they're great, but we think this is sort of a third model. And when you look at the three models, it's about the supply of the product. So eBay will always exist, or that model will always exist. It's great for that like unique one-of-one item. You need 30 pictures and 8 paragraphs of like, what is this rare thing I've never seen before? Yep. Those products don't sell in StockX. It's a one-of-one. There's no liquidity. There's no market for that. Yep. On the far other end, Amazon is about things that are purely commoditized already. So, paper plates and plastic cups and toilet paper and Cheerios, right? Like things that have infinite supply. They will make as many Cheerios as people will buy. Yep. And so that's fine. And Amazon aggregates it, and you should have a retail price. Cheerios are $4 a box. That's fine. Yep. But everything in the middle, which are most consumer goods, sneakers and watches and cars and wine and toys, everything in the middle has finite supply. There's only X number of those shoes. There's only Y number of these shoes. Yep. So pricing this based on retail price of some arbitrary number is antiquated, right? Think about like, I mean, when those came out, right, and they retailed for $150 and they were reselling for $400, right? Like, what kind of broken system sells a $400 widget for $150 and just relies on mass chaos and all the crap that we know to go through to get it, right? It's about supply and demand. And so that's the world of our products. It's not nearly as big as Amazon and eBay, right? And the world of those products, but there's still a lot in the middle that's about finite supply, and it's not just about the crazy expensive stuff, right? It can be on the downside. It can be about discounts. It can be about just anything where you're asking, well, what is the fair price for this product? And that's the model.
Yeah, and one of the things that, like, to me is the biggest, and to me it's the biggest risk, and you kind of mentioned it with, the sticker price is $150, is selling for $400. Why doesn't Nike just make more? Why don't they just, like, why do you feel like, because it seems like all of these companies are leaving so much money on the table, and obviously it sounds like you're way ahead of, if that happens, you already know how you guys are going to adjust, and obviously it's never going to be a true commodity like Cheerios, but is that coming, do you think? Does that scare you? Why don't they do it?
Yeah. So first of all, the brands know what they're doing. Like they've been doing this, particularly Nike and Jordan, right? This is 1985, since like the first Jordans, that they really understand how to leverage scarcity as a business model, right? Yeah, they could produce a little bit more, they could charge a little bit more money, but they get all of the marketing and the brand cachet and the hype of the fact that, people are sleeping outside of a sneaker store to buy something, or there's stories about, why our shoes cost $5,000. So there's a lot of value in that. The way that the brands can maximize against that is producing a little bit more supply, raising retail prices a little bit more, right? But there's some really interesting math that happens, which is they still want to have supply be less than demand. Like they still want to sell out all their products immediately. And what happens is, like, let's say that supply of a shoe, let's say demand of a shoe is 100. They think there's 100 people that want this shoe, and they make 96 of them. Well, they'll sell out 96, no problem, right? It'll sell out. There'll be some secondary market. But if demand was 100 and they made 101, if they made more shoes than people want, they might only sell 70 or 60 or some number way below 96, right? Because as soon as anybody can walk in a store and buy that pair of shoes, as soon as my mother can walk in a store and buy a pair of shoes, like the 17-year-old kid, like the cool kid doesn't want to wear the shoes my mother can buy, right? And so all of a sudden, so that's the game that the brands are playing, which is like they want to make just as much as they can, but still say less than demand, so that they sell out and it's cool and it's hyped and all that. And the at the end of the day, the reason why it's it's an art, not a science, is like nobody knows demand. Like that is, it's an estimate, it's a prediction, it's a percentage increase off of last year, right? Like they know supply, we're gonna make X number of these shoes, and that's the really interesting part about this whole thing is that brands are trying to figure out how many do we make so we can maximize profits, but we still want all the craziness and hype and sell out, right? And so it's a really, really interesting dynamic that's been going on for 34 years.
Yeah, I just feel like that's one thing that you guys have done. Obviously, this whole industry has done such a good job at taking advantage of, is I feel like e-commerce has changed the demand. Like it's multiplied the demand by 1 million. Like I always say about Supreme. Supreme used to be, obviously it's still the coolest thing in the world, but you used to have to go to one of the handful of stores, wait in line for a very long time and get it. Now a kid in Minnesota who has money and is the cool kid in Minnesota can order it. So there's a whole different set of people just geographically who are even in line to sign up for this demand, right? And I just wonder if like that means that the same shoe that Nike would have made 100 of 10 years ago, they now could make 1,000 of and still sell out.
Yeah, I think that's right, and not that we're still debating the success of the internet, right? But like this is what happened, right? All of a sudden, we're now everyone at scale, you could do that, and that kid in Minnesota could access that. And you look at, I mentioned Jordan 85 as that's sort of the start of the whole thing. But the second really big moment in sneakers was 99 2000, which is, the internet and eBay. And now all of a sudden you went from this very sort of local underground thing to a global underground thing where now I could buy it from every places. And then it was 2011, 2012, Instagram, social media, and then it became a sort of a global, mainstream thing, and everyone, right? And that's what it was, right? It was about, because think about it, like Instagram was such a perfect catalyst for all of this, because all sneakerheads ever wanted to do is see what shoes other people wearing and show off their shoes, and that was the growth of all those people coming in. So to your point, exactly, it was that demand.
It's interesting. I just see, I feel like they're kind of, maybe I'm wrong because I'm not as informed as you are on this stuff, but like it seems like what's happening with the Yeezy stuff is they're starting to make more and more and more. And it seems like they're starting to really push the boundary of pushing that line and hitting that line where your mom has them. You know what I mean? And I'm just curious. I don't really have an opinion yet. I'm curious what's going to happen there because I just feel like they're pushing it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That's exactly what's happening. And, you know, we see at StockX where there will be moments in time where Yeezys are selling on StockX and they're still available at retail, or they're selling for less than retail on StockX.
Yeah.
You know, they've been like playing this line where, particularly on shoes that are not the 350, right? When they did like the 500 black, they were selling for less than retail.
Yeah.
And that's it. And it's Adidas, you know, playing this game, and as they should be. It's not a knock on them, of trying to sort of maximize that business for themselves while also keep that hype and keep that thing. And it's a fine line. And there's there's a lot of Yeezys. And, you know, I don't know if you're as hyper sort of vigilant as me, but like when I walk around the airports and I travel all the time, is like I see everyone's feet first. And, you know, when I see someone wearing these shoes or Yeezys or someone else, I'll look up and see who they are. And when I look up and see the people that are wearing Yeezys today, it is not who was wearing Yeezys
getting risky,
a year ago,
man.
right?
Yeah. It's getting real risky.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, so I want to. This is the time, I guess, where we snap back, right?
Good.
So I want to. This is one thing that I really like about what you're doing and the way that you communicate. Is I don't feel like, not that there's not smart people in streetwear, right? But you are very clear on what you're doing. You're incredibly smart. And I think that like the fact that you do speaking and you do press and you do stuff like that is really cool, because I don't think there's enough cool, smart people that are really out there. You know what I mean? You kind of get like the dorky smart people or the cool streetwear guys that are too cool to talk. So my question is, how did you become this, right? Where did you grow up? Let's start at the very beginning. What was childhood like? What were you into?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, I turned 41 3 days ago.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I have the exact same story as every other 40-year-old sneakerhead in the United States, right? Like, I grew up playing basketball when Jordan played. I always wanted Air Jordans. My mom would never buy me Air Jordans. As soon as I got some money, I bought Air Jordans. Like, we all have, like, the exact same story. And, you know, for me, and it's somewhat ironic, at least, that I'm sitting here wearing Nike SBs. You know, like, when I was in middle school and high school, and I was all about basketball, and basketball was my life, and, you know, basketball shoes were my life, and Nike commercials, and you know, I had Sports Illustrated covers on my wall and Nike ads on my wall and that sort of stuff. And skate and basketball were two completely different worlds, right? Like in high school, like the basketball kids were here and the skate kids were there. And like, I didn't even feel comfortable wearing Nike SBs until like probably 10, 11 years ago, just from you know, it's like, oh, those are super cool. But like, I'm basketball, I can't be wearing, you know, skate. I show up at school wearing the skate shoes.
It's
you know?
so true.
But, you know, and so anyway, so that was a lot of it was basketball driven, right? And I think if you talk to a lot of people, it was either basketball or skate, you know, who are in this world now as part of it. And so, but as a, you know, as a career and as a business, I'm a startup guy, right? Like I was selling candy in 6th grade and trading baseball cards, and, you know, and it was like, that was the hustle when I was that age. You know, now kids are writing apps and selling shoes and everything, but you know, that was hustle. By the way, quick side note, do you know Gary Vaynerchuk? Yeah. So the first time I ever met Gary was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and it was in New York, and we were at this super New York like lunch counter spot, super tight, and he and I are sitting like this close to each other eating. And the first thing he says to me, and you know, he's just as intense in person as he is, you know, on video. And the first thing he says to me, and he's like about same age, like 4 or 5 years older than me. First thing he goes is, baseball cards or candy? And I was like, oh, I was on both, actually, right? Because like that was a hustle, and it was his sort of thing. Like if you're our age and you're an entrepreneur and you weren't doing one of those two things in middle school, then like you're not a real entrepreneur. That's his mindset, right?
That was his opening line.
100%, right? Like, and we were this far from each other and
That's
stuff like
good.
that, you know. And totally took me, and I was like, oh, you know.
That's
but
good.
like that's what it was, right? Like I was trading baseball cards and that, and then I was selling candy. I used to jump over the fence behind my parents' house and go to the grocery store, buy candy and you know, and gum and stuff. But so there was always like that sort of hustle. And then so when but I did really well in school, right? And I ended up going to Emory University in Atlanta, and then I actually went to grad school, and I was a JD MBA, so I was a lawyer for a minute, like, you know, And so I've always had some corporate job in between every startup.
Yeah.
But here's the thing is I've started to run 3 other startups before StockX.
Yeah.
And they had nothing to do with sneakers, almost intentionally so, right?
Yeah.
I almost intentionally separated business and pleasure in my life because I collected sneakers since I was 8, and it was always like, oh, well, there wasn't a real. I don't want to create a business that was just an excuse to play with sneakers, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like at the time, particularly because sneakers was such an underground thing. There wasn't as much like business opportunity out there, and so it was very almost serendipitous that it sort of came full circle that I'd shut down my last startup in the crash of 08-09. I'd been in Atlanta for 15 years, and I took a job at IBM in New York. Yeah. And I never in a million years thought that I was going to go work for IBM. But, it was after the crash, like it was the worst job market. And so anyway, so I go to New York, and I take this job, and I'm a strategy consultant at IBM. And if you're a startup guy and you go work at IBM, the first thing you do is you start working on shit on the side. Yeah. Right? So the first thing I did was trying to figure out, I was like, oh, man, I was doing all this data work. I wonder if I get a hold of some sneaker data, right? I wonder if I get a hold of sneaker data just for my own amusement, just to see if I can play with it. Because as I mentioned earlier, this was like 2011, 2012. Yeah. So we had this like, oh, the whole world is now interested in sneakers, and, the Galaxy phone release and All-Star Weekend in Orlando that year, and the return of articles about riots and people camping out and all the craziness and all that. Yeah. And that was the start of this whole thing, which was, it was totally a side project. And it was like I needed some sort of side hustle at IBM, and I had now built these data skills around being as part of this. Yep. And that led to me creating the company, which was called Campless. Yeah. And Campless it becomes later StockX in the story, but Campless was a price guide for sneakers, and that's all it was. And it was a side hustle, not unlike selling gum or baseball cards or whatever. It was just some sort of entrepreneurial side hustle in between the startup thing, and I was just fortunate to have done well in school and be in a position where I could get nice high-paying jobs and big corporate jobs in between stuff and work with smart people as I figured out whatever my next thing is. And so that sort of gets almost to the water's edge of like what happens in StockX and Campless and everything from that. But the last point I think is really relevant is, I've started 3 companies before this. The first one I was single. Second one I was married with no kids. Mm-hmm. Third one I was married with 1 kid. StockX was married with 2 kids, right? Mm-hmm. So each time you do that, your risk parameters and priorities change a little bit, and that's also part of it. Yeah.
Man, I have so many questions from within that.
Well, that was 35 years, whatever. So
there you go. Yeah. So when you started the first, well, let me actually start at the beginning. Like when you were coming up in school, and let's say even going to college, like did you at that time see yourself that early as a founder, and you knew that was your ultimate goal was to be an entrepreneur?
100%, right? Like I didn't realize it until a couple years later, because at that time the word entrepreneur didn't really exist. Like I started college in 1995, right? Like this is, I got to college and they told us about email and the internet. Yeah. And I honestly, I like freshman year, I remember thinking like, oh, this must be like a college thing, like the email and the internet. Yeah. I didn't realize kind of the whole world like discovered email and the internet in like 95-ish. And so like that idea didn't come out, but I like all in all 100% like, yeah.
And then when you started the first sneaker like side hustle, did you at that time think this could be the thing, or was it purely just a side hustle to you at the time? Because you still didn't want to blend the two.
Yeah, no, in the very beginning, it was just a side hustle, right? It was, and that first year or so, there was so much time spent literally just in like mountains and mountains of Excel spreadsheets where I was sitting there, like, by the way, all the work in that, right? Because what we were doing is we were scraping eBay and scraping eBay auctions to figure out what are sneakers actually worth? What are sneakers actually being sold for? eBay at the time was still the largest marketplace for sneakers. And all the time and energy was spent in cleaning that data. eBay's a mess of data because anyone can write whatever they want, right? I'm selling a pair of Nike SB Skunks, but they write in there Nike SB Skunk, Yeezy, Kanye, LeBron, Kobe, and 19 other keywords. Yeah. So anyway, that's all I was doing was like doing like, all this like Excel work and data cleaning. And it was like, man, like, what am I doing? But it was just like, I knew to be doing something. Yeah. And there was no way, like, I didn't really think it was going to be this. But I was like, well, there's definitely a need for a price guide. Yeah. And so it's just sort of one foot in front of the other of like understanding like this is what we're trying to build right at this moment. And then you figure it out. Yeah.
And what do you think motivated you to do so well in school? Do you think that it was part of that master plan of wanting to succeed at a high level, or did you, I just think...
I mean, I grew up at a time where, that was you go to school, you get good grades, you go to college, you get a job. I started high school in 1991, right? There was no, internet and entrepreneur. And I think it's crazy, and not necessarily in a bad way, that, kids are skipping college or choosing not to go to college or building careers right out of high school. And that's great. And it's just a completely different mindset. So that was the very clear path. And, my father was a lawyer and grades and school was always, super important. And I was, fortunate to be able to do well in school and do that. And so that's just sort of, what you did.
Yeah.
There's an interesting side part of that, which is, being a lawyer, lawyers are very, you write a lot, right? It's all about sort of the written word and all that. And so whenever I would get in trouble at home, my punishment was always to write essays. Mm-hmm. That was the thing.
Because
right?
your dad was a lawyer.
Yeah. Right. To make me and that was a punishment. Sit there and I would write. And so it turned out I'm a very good writer now, and it's a function of that. Yeah. But everything was always academically based, having a father who's super cerebral and very, as a lawyer. And so that was a big part of it.
Yeah, you're an interesting blend of people. That being said, what were your friends like through high school and college? Did you have the lawyer friends and then the cool friends, or did you how did you?
It was it was interesting. I was just having this conversation with my wife, sort of looking back at our friend. It was the kids on the basketball team. Yeah. Right. And the one kid in the smart class with me who was also in the basketball team. And that was my best friend. Right. It was because I'd much rather be playing basketball, but it was just it was very different. So. Yeah, you're really
the bridge between the two worlds.
Yeah. It was. I've always felt, and it was like this in college where. In almost every aspect of my life, social, academic, business, very much jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah. Which makes you either a CEO or unemployable. Yep. And that's
true, man.
And I've had literally that conversation with other founders where, because I'm really good at a lot of things, mm-hmm. but I am not the best data scientist at StockX, right? But for a while I was, and then we hired better people, right? For a while I wrote every single word on the site and every single blog post, and then we hired people that were better than there, right? So it's a very much and that's kind of how it was with friendships and stuff. I wasn't part of any one group 100%, but I was sort of part of 6 different groups, and and could sort of weave in between.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And what do you think, just quickly about college, because I talk about it a lot on here, obviously, but you said, it's kind of surprising to you that a lot of people aren't going now and that are just heading straight into being a super entrepreneur out of high school or maybe even earlier. What did you gain from college? Even though it sounds like you didn't go with to accomplish your life goal. It was kind of the next thing, and it was kind of part of your journey. Yeah. What did you gain from there that you wouldn't have had that helps you now?
So, so 2 things. So, first of all, just independence. And I feel now being an employer of many kids that are, 20 to 25 and seeing, and I used to use millennial as an insult.
Yeah.
I don't anymore.
A lot of people do.
But we know what we're talking about, that specific type of person.
Yep.
And they're not all like that, by the way, but there's a lot of people that are in that thing that don't have the sort of maturity of having gone out and living on your own for 4 years and navigating that part of life, which is unbelievably valuable. But the other is, I was so I went to Emory, a very small school, and so I was a part of a fraternity, and I was a president of my fraternity, and that was very much a function of I wasn't a fraternity in any social group. It's all different cliques of different people, but it was being able to navigate all of that, right? Yeah. Which again, I wasn't 100% part of any one, but sort of part of all of that. And that a fraternity, as much as bad raps and people that the navigating the personality dynamics within a large social group that at that time of your life, when you look back now, holy crap, it's way easier to manage everyone at StockX who are motivated by we work here, we get a paycheck, this is how shit works, rather than 100 people in a fraternity that just want to get drunk and make your life miserable, right?
That's true. It's true, man. I didn't really think about the importance of being able to coexist with a lot of different types of people if you ever really want to run a business. because it is something that even I do now here, and I didn't have a lot of experience with it, and I think there was quite a learning curve because, I grew up with a bit of the like skater mentality, right, which is like your own little clique and kind of screw everyone else. And I do think that when I was super young, trying to wrap my head around how to run this business, it was hard because you have to understand a lot of different perspectives and kind of direct all of that. And I guess I don't know, I didn't take that into consideration. Like I do think for young people listening that one day want to follow a similar path, like it's really important to get out there and get around a lot of different groups and be able to coexist.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I'll sit there and have to have conversations with, I don't know, the mayor of Detroit, right? Yeah. And then like yesterday, it was 50 Cent. So you navigate through that, and we haven't talked about Dan yet, and we should. It was what's really been great about this is Dan, who is one of the most successful business people in the world. Quicken Loans is sort of the flagship where he built most of the empire, but there's about 130 companies that are part of the Quicken Loans family of companies, the Cleveland Cavaliers being the most notable. At the highest level for not only me, but for everyone else, Dan is 100% like, he's like, you should be you, right? And like, this is how I dress in meetings with Dan and the mayor of Detroit, or whether it's 50 Cent. And that was all about sort of like Dan sort of giving permission implicitly, but saying, listen, no, like this is like who you are. And I remember the first time that he and I went on, I think we were on CNBC together. Yeah. And I was like, oh, do you want me to like wear like something? He's like, no, it's fucking, we wear a hat. You should wear your hat, and I was like, all right, and like that was, and we're at that point and in society and a life where like that's how most people should be. They're not all, right? There's a whole lot of, whatever Dan is, 55-year-old billionaires who would not be, at that sort of level and comfort with that. But that's a big part of that is like, if you can be who you are, then it's a whole lot easier to be able to interact with, with everyone else because they're no longer, and by the way, I worked as a lawyer and I wore a suit every day when I was a lawyer and I was at IBM and I was at least business casual at IBM, right? But like you get to the point where like, you can just be who you are and it makes the rest of it a lot easier.
Yeah. I think what's really cool about your situation too is you've created a business that is like literally it sounds like the crossroads of your experience meeting your passion. And so I think you dressing like this is the brand. Like you are the guy. And so I think it's even more important that you do that now because you don't want, if you're a cool 16-year-old sneaker collector, you don't want the guy owning the company that you work with to be wearing a suit looking like a weird lawyer. You know what I mean? Like you want it to be a guy with a backwards new era.
Yeah. That's true too, right? And it worked out well. I mean, so I'll give you the backstory of how we got together with Dan because
let me just ask, because this is what I was going to get into anyway, so how did you go from the first side hustle? I also want to know about like when you knew it was time to quit IBM, quit your job, take this leap. How'd you go raise the money, or find the partners? How'd you give me all that?
Yeah, exactly. So we create Campless at IBM. It was purely a side hustle. There was, and I ended up building this sort of volunteer army. By the time I sold the company to Dan a couple years later, there were 17 people that were working with me. There was no money, there was no equity, it was just all people that like love sneakers or love data. And because what happened was, as I started the thing at the beginning and put a couple blog posts out there about what we were doing, and for that really small Venn diagram overlap of sneakers and data, for people like that, they came out of the woodwork. And because there was nothing like, we were just the first people to do real analytics around the sneaker industry. And so what happened was all these people started coming out and hitting me on Twitter and email and be like, yo, I love sneakers, I love data, can I help? And I was like, oh, okay, right? Like, and so I ended up screening probably a couple hundred people to get to those 17, and it was a process over time. But we had this group of people that were in it just for the fun of it. And so we built this business on the side. I say business, we really didn't make any money, but people were using it, right? And we had a blog that was kind of like Freakonomics for sneakers, and we and had this sort of brand around the data. But for me, then it was like, all right, how do I leave IBM? There was something there. I didn't know what the business was, but there was something there. How do you leave IBM? What do you do with this thing?
Because I'm guessing you're making good money at IBM.
Yeah, a really nice salary at IBM, and that was fine. And I could have just sort of continued up that career path, but that's not.
It's another. Another big question I get from young people is like, I have this passion, but I have this job and I can't fulfill the passion with the job, and when's the right time? And it's like, you can't ever really tell someone that over a DM on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
But like, you can kind of learn from examples. So
But there's never a right time. Like the right time is like, you just have to go and do it. And the hardest thing is if there's other people that, you support or they're part of it. And, I met my wife in law school, and I took a job after law school and went to work for a company, a law firm called Alston Bird, which is one of the largest law firms in Atlanta. And I was a bankruptcy attorney and made a lot of money. And my wife, her family is Chilean, became an immigration attorney. And it's sort of the opposite end of the financial spectrum as being an immigration attorney. But from like the day that we met, I was like, look, I might be in law school and I might go take this job at Alston Bird, but like, I'm an entrepreneur. Like, don't like get comfortable with whatever we make at Alston Bird for the next year. Because the whole time I was there, I was working on a startup on the side. And so the fact that like from the day we met, like she knew who I was and what that was, and was gonna be okay living through that, made it easier. Like when I left Alston Bird after 11 months and gave up that to do a startup, and and the same thing when happened a year later or a couple years later at IBM.
I just can't believe that having that confidence or clarity on your own life to say, look, don't get comfortable. I'm gonna make a leap here, and shit could get a little sketchy.
Right.
And then to actually do it.
I mean, look, I want to like point out, because I was listening to a really interesting discussion around sort of like what does white privilege mean, right? And like I was in a situation that like, you know what, even if like I completely fell on my face, like I could have gone to my parents, or I could, you know what I mean? Like, and like, sure, I never would have wanted to do that, but like, at the very, and like not everyone has that. And like that becomes the really big distinction in a lot of those cases. And I never hear anyone talk about that. And I feel like I should, because like I was super fortunate to have that like, even if everything went to shit, right? Like my parents or my, I have enough family in places that like, and so does my wife. Right. And like, and then I have a degree that like, worst comes to worst, you fucking dust off your ego and you go back to a law firm, or you go back to IBM and and can go get one of those jobs and do that. But like, it was still, that didn't change the fact that, we still went from living on, a lot of money to a little money, right? In those times and dealing with that, but that was okay. Right. And today, by the way, we still try to live super frugally, because like you never know. And by the way, no matter what happens with StockX and things are going great, like we'll turn on and do it again, and I'll start from wherever. But it's just because that's what I want to do. But it like society and has made it easier to do that, because there's a lot of opportunities and help that. Anyway, sidetrack. So here's what happened. So I'm talking to everybody in the sneaker industry. Nike, eBay, Foot Locker, Complex, etc., trying to figure out, what is this thing? What if we build a campus? Who can I work with? How do I leave IBM? That was sort of the question, right?
Got it.
And there was never a good fit. I mean, they're just like, there wasn't a good, basically what happened is all these companies were just trying to figure out like, well, what's the value here? Right? And so that's okay. And then right before Easter of 2015, so I guess almost 4 years ago now, I get a totally random email from two guys, and they say, email says, hey, we work with Dan Gilbert. We're really interested in what you're doing. Can we talk? Dan's got no ties to the sneaker industry, but sure, right? You can talk to anybody. So I get on the phone with these guys, and it's like word for word, the exact same conversation I'd had 1,000 times at that point. I didn't think anything of it. And then 2 days later, they call me back, and they say, listen, we definitely want to do this business. We definitely want to work with you. We'd like to fly you to Cleveland to go to a game and meet Dan. Well, first half of that statement was like, whatever. Everybody says they're going to do shit, right? The second half, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. They can fly me to a basketball game. No problem, right? So we had just moved back to Philadelphia after we had our first kid. So I'm telling my wife, my friends, I get to go to a game with the owner of the Cavs. Like, that was the whole story, right? That's all I thought was coming out of this. These guys were like, at short notice, could you come on Easter Sunday? I was like, I'm Jewish. Absolutely. Let's make this thing happen, right? So the one caveat was my wife was actually 39 weeks pregnant with our second kid, right? And so, do you have kids?
Nope.
Right. So there's a reaction. So when I say that for people who have kids, like, oh shit, right?
Yeah. You can tell.
At 4, you're due at 40 weeks, right? Which means she was about to go into labor. So the plan was, it was a 3 p.m. game on Easter Sunday. So the plan was fly in the morning, go to the game, and fly right back home that night. We get there, we kind of make small talk during the game, and then after the game, we go back in this private owner's room near the locker room, and it's Dan and his 2 guys and me, and we do all the background of me and sneakers and IBM and campus and blah, blah. when I started Campus in early 2012, I'd had this like one piece of paper, this like one like roadmap of what I thought I could do with this business. And it was really simple. There were only 3 things on this piece of paper. The first was a price guide, and that's the business we had.
Yeah.
The second was this idea of sneaker portfolios.
Okay.
So this very logical extension that if I know the value of one pair of sneakers, I could very easily look at your whole sneaker collection and tell you the value of your whole sneaker collection. And then you could just track that value the same way you track a stock portfolio. Really like easy application of data, of value. And then the logic was, well, if you understood asset pricing, if you understood portfolio pricing, then perhaps you could create an actual stock market for sneakers. And that was the idea. It was a very pie-in-the-sky idea. I'm not a developer. There's no way I could have built that. But it was just kind of what I thought made sense with the data. And so I took this piece of paper to every one of these meetings, Nike, eBay, Foot Locker, Complex, and everybody said, oh, that's pretty cool. What we want to do is this. And we want to take your data and do X, Y, and Z in our business. And fair enough, right? Like I didn't think Nike was going to change their whole business and build a stock market. But I share with Dan and his guys, and they look at me with pure shock. And it doesn't really register to me why. And then one of them takes a piece of paper out of his pocket and goes, yeah, we have one of those. That is exactly what we want to build, a stock market for sneakers. And I was like,
what the hell?
Right? So like the crazy backstory of this company is that there was maybe one other person in the whole world that had the exact same idea at the exact same time, and it happens to be one of the most successful business people in the world. Like, what the fuck? Like, it's so crazy for so many reasons, right? I mean, he's got no ties to sneaker. It's been almost 4 years, and I literally can't get him to wear sneakers. Right? But
that's insane. And that's just from, so a couple questions. Is that just from him seeing like something's happening here in the sneaker market? He's obviously not a sneaker guy, but what if you did this? That was kind of his. Yeah.
So what happened was, I later found this out, was Dan has always had this sort of fascination with markets and the efficiencies of markets. And he'd always had this bigger idea around stock market of things, that you should be able to buy everything the way you buy oil and stocks. And then he sees his 15-year-old son at the time buying and selling sneakers on eBay.
Got it.
Like every other 15-year-old kid. Takes a closer look at that and says, you know what, that's a pretty crappy market leader, eBay, and that'd be a perfect place to start a stock market. So Dan goes out and he puts together a team, unbeknownst to me, to start working on a sneaker stock market.
And that's who those guys were.
That's who those guys were. Unfortunately, those guys got a week, 2 weeks into it and realized, well, crap, we need a sneaker guy, right? Who's a sneaker guy that's going to help us run the sneaker stock market. So they go out to do some research. They find Campus. They find me. Turns out the sneaker guy is also trying to start a sneaker stock market. He's also ran through startups and worked for IBM and wasn't like some random guy. So it was this crazy serendipity of like everything they were looking for and everything I was looking for. And all this is happening in the locker room at the Cavs game on Easter Sunday, right?
That's such like billionaire. When I picture billionaire, like how they operate, it's exactly that.
Oh, well,
it's like
so here's the rest of it, right? So Dan's whole organization is based in Detroit, except for the Cavs. So Dan's like, we got to come out to Detroit to see everything. And I was like, oh, well, my week's pretty light this week. I'm sure I could come whenever. This is on Sunday. And so his assistant takes out his phone. He's like, how about like Tuesday or Wednesday? Dan's like, put that away. Why don't you come back with us right now? And I was like, okay. It's like I text my wife. I'm like, please don't go into labor, right? Text IBM. Please. Like, I'm not showing up at work tomorrow. Sorry. So we fly from Cleveland to Detroit, spend all day in Detroit, tour of all the businesses, meeting people. Monday afternoon in Dan's office, he says, you know, we'd really like you to stay another day to keep talking. I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? Text my wife. I'm like, please don't fucking kill me. I text IBM. I literally wore the same clothes for 3 days in a row. Finally, end of the day, Tuesday, back in Dan's office. Hey, listen, we all agree. We think this is the right fit. We want to buy Campus. We want you to come here and run the company. And they finally let me go home. I get home. It's like 1 a.m. on Tuesday night. You know, I walk the door. My wife's waiting up for me, 9 months pregnant. And I was like, yo, I think we're moving to Detroit. And she's like, what the hell? I thought you went to Cleveland.
Oh, so she didn't even know. You just been on this like whirlwind billionaire business trip.
Yeah, it was crazy, right? And look, that's the short version of 5 years of like me doing this on the side and how I find these guys. And what I couldn't have known at the time was that was just a microcosm of how crazy this whole thing was going to be. Because, you know, I was the 5th person. We now have 650 about, right? I've been in the office for 3 days, so I'm sure it's more. And like the craziest part about this is we still sit right outside of Dan's office. His office is on one side of the floor and ours is on the other. And he still runs the Cavs and Quicken and 130 other companies and literally the whole city of Detroit. But proportionately, he's more engaged in StockX than anything because he's a true co-founder of this. Like he had literally the exact same idea independently. And then the big idea is really big. And we talked a little bit about before. We can talk more. But like the big idea is big. And so for Dan, right, to be a part of this, and he still got a lot of stuff to do, but it's just it's really just a phenomenal situation to be in, and to have like someone like that who then also then funded the company in the beginning. We've taken on other money and stuff like that, but it's a really just a crazy thing.
Insane. I had no idea that there was that much like serendipity, and I thought like you, of course, I mean, now this sounds rude, but like I thought you had an idea, went around looking for a partner that could help fund it, and you found Dan Gilbert. I had no idea.
Kind of. I mean, right? Like I was talking to all of the regular players in the space.
Yeah, but he found you just as much as you found him.
And back to what we were talking about earlier around product. So basically what happened is, so there's 130 companies, about 5 major industries that Dan's in. Yeah. One is professional sports. Cavs are the most notable, with this are minor elite teams. One's real estate. They own, about 100 buildings in Detroit and a couple other cities. Casinos, mortgages, primary business. And then last is like startups. And so there was a startup company. It was called Up2, UPTO. And Up2 was a company that Dan and his venture fund had put some money into. It wasn't working out. Mm-hmm. And these guys had taken an acqui-hire deal, kind of a soft landing with Yahoo. Yeah. And the deal was done. Their houses were packed up. They were moving out to California. And Dan runs into the founder of the company and the CEO on like a Friday night and says, "Hey, I heard you guys are going to California. Don't go. I have this idea about a sneaker stock market, and I think you guys are a really great product team." It was him and 2 developers and 1 designer. And none of those guys know shit about sneakers. But if Dan Gilbert's like, "I want to build a business with you," then you say yes. Yeah. And so they get out of their deal at Yahoo, and they show up outside of Dan's office on Monday morning. And they start working on it. Unfortunately for me, a week later, they realized they needed a sneaker guy. Yeah. And so it all came together really well. But the CEO of that company is now the COO of StockX, Greg. Got it. Who, and again, like that was like, Dan identified them amongst many other companies as like, listen, this is a really great product team. They happen to have been on like an A team on a B- idea. And so it didn't work out. But like he wanted them to come and build this other product. And that's how this thing started. And so there was 4 of them, and then I was the 5th. Yeah.
That is amazing, man. That's just like, and like I said, that's also such a like high level way of operating. You know what I mean? Of piecing together, tracking down the sneaker guy that's the perfect dude with the perfect idea, with the background to piece together, meet in the locker room of the Cavs, fly around, piece together this guy from like, so
and
good.
a lot of that they didn't know, right? They thought, they were like, all right, this guy is a sneaker guy, he's got the data. The fact that I pull out this piece of paper that like, it was funny because Greg tells a story, he's like, we're going to Cleveland and we're strategizing like, on the plane, like, all right, how are we going to convince this guy to build a stock market? Right? Yeah. And then like I sit there, I'm like, yo, I want to build a stock market. Right? Like is that sort of like crazy shit that it's, because I had this conversation with Nike and eBay and Complex and nothing against, any of those. They're focused on their business as they should be. And they were all like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea, right? But like, and that's fine. But the fact is that like, so that's like, anyway, it's crazy.
Have you ever had a moment like with any of the Nike guys or anyone where like now you're StockX and it's like, shit.
Yeah, all the time. All the time.
That's just, I love, it's a little immature, but that's my favorite. I love those stories because I think everyone wants those moments, myself included, and I've had a few and they're amazing, where you just get to like, you think back to that time when you're pitching everyone, no one quite gets it, everyone wants to change it, and then you finally get to say, I told you so, is just a cool thing.
You know what it is, and I'll tell you what, there are definitely moments, and it's human nature, right, that we all sort of feel a certain way in those moments. And I've definitely been in moments and acted ways that I felt guilty about before. But I try, someone else gave me this advice at some point, and I try to remember it. He's like, remember all the times in all the other companies where you had that same attitude, and then the companies didn't work out. Yeah. And all that, and I was like, "That's fair, right?" And to try to think like that because they're pretty awesome, right? And like definitely, but honestly, like we're still not at where I want to be in those conversations because, it's been 6-7 years now of having these conversations, particularly with Nike and Jordan, around like this is how you guys should be working with the secondary market, how you should be working with us, and there's still all the brands are still sort of at the water's edge with. There's always been this big divide between retail and resale, right? Of dating back to 1985 and the first Jordans, right? Everything Nike has done has created the secondary market. They benefit from it, all the stuff we were talking about earlier. But, if you'd ever asked Nike PR about resale, oh, no, that's not us. We're not a part of that, and rightfully so. Anytime there was ever violence around sneakers and 1991 Sports Illustrated cover your sneakers in your life, all that stuff, there's reasons to separate it. But like the bigger idea of StockX is that this should be the way that you bring the primary and secondary markets together to work together. And the best analogy of this that's already happened is what happened in ticketing. So if you think about like ticketing in the United States 10, 15 years ago, you had leagues that were arresting ticket scalpers and shutting down ticketing websites. Well, now StubHub is the official resale marketplace of Major League Baseball, right? And not only that, but StubHub does primary ticket deals with the Sixers and the Yankees and a few other teams, right? So what had happened is the leagues and the owners said, why are we fighting the secondary market? It's not going anywhere. We should figure out how to work with them. Yeah. And I feel like we're having that moment now around sneakers, at least in the conversation we're having. Yeah. So it's great that the brands and retail are sort of like, oh, great, StockX, that idea worked and you guys are legit. But like, I need everyone to take that next step, say, all right, now how do we work together? Yeah. Because by the way, like not only like better for us, it's better for them, it's better for the customer. Like there should be one ecosystem. Yeah. And that's really the high level idea behind StockX. And what's interesting is Dan, part of the genesis of the idea on his side was in owning the Cavs and in not being able to participate in the secondary market, particularly when they had LeBron and they had this massive, secondary market for their tickets and for everything else. Yeah. And it's not even participating in it, but like he couldn't prevent his customers from being ripped off by scammers and selling fake tickets. And he just had no way to engage with that part of the market. Yep. So there's a lot of like sort of logic where we're sort of both coming from like of this. And that's the bigger idea is like, how do you work with Nike? Yeah. And
Yeah, I guess so you can only kind of have that like little ego moment in private, because you still have future conversation. No, I love those part of the stories because I feel like a lot of people, especially a lot of listeners, probably feel like they're in that moment of going around and pitching it and just kind of not getting traction. And I think being able to look at like those little moments that really mean a lot.
And that's fair, right? Like that's human nature, and that's great. And it's interesting as we're. We never thought that we would raise money or would never raise outside money. Having a billionaire as a co-founder changes things. But we went and did a real round, and we raised $44 million from Google Ventures and Battery Ventures last year. And it was about those people, right? It was around having those people at the table. Yep. And it was interesting to see as we went through that process. Even today, the investors that passed on us during that time come back now. Yeah. That our business is 10 times larger than it was then and stuff like that. That's always interesting too.
Yeah. But a lot of good feelings.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So that's what I was going to ask you too. Is that's the reason, the main motivation for going and raising outside money, even though you had Dan Gilbert, was to just get more strategic people at the table. Yeah.
So we've done 2 outside rounds. The first round was a really small round, all big names, small checks. Eminem, Mark Wahlberg, Scooter Braun, a couple other professional sports owners. It was for that. Yep. And by the way, a lot of it was because those people had been helping us anyway. Yep. It was kind of the greatest value we could give to Eminem was to let him invest. Right? Am I going to write a $20,000 check to Eminem? Doesn't really, right? Yeah. And then it was, a year and a half later, and we said, listen, well, we were going to take on more money anyway. And Dan would have been more than happy to write the check, but we all agreed, you know what, like, there's people out there that have done this before, and to go and bring in Google Ventures and Battery Ventures, both of whom have a lot of experience within marketplaces, was a really great sort of opportunity. So it was 100% around those people at the table, because particularly if your company is going well, money is easy to find. It's like, who do you actually want in the room? Yeah. And so now our board it's Dan, me, Greg, and the guys from Google and Battery, and it's an awesome group to be able to have those people there.
That's amazing. And then so pardon my ignorance on this one, but when you said, like now with StubHub, the way that works with ticketing, do the owners play a part in the sales of tickets no matter where the value goes? Like if the tickets are super, how's that work?
Yeah. Different leagues have different deals. Mm-hmm. But the beginning, at least when it was the beginning of the StubHub Major League Baseball deal, was that like the sort of tip of the spear was you go to Yankees.com and you want to buy a pair of tickets and it's sold out. Yep. You say sold out, and then there'd be a link right next to it that says available on StubHub. Yep. So now you as a consumer, you now know where to go. Otherwise before you would have reach a dead end and then you're on your own. Like, where do I go? How do I get tickets? Is it real? Is it not? Yeah. And so now what you've done is you've completed that customer journey where It's a better experience for the customer. And then as part of that, there's a rev share, there's a data share, there's a marketing share, because you keep that customer in that ecosystem. And now, and I don't know the exact financials of it, right? But there's some percentage of the revenue that StubHub is getting from that transaction then goes back to Major League Baseball or the Yankees to do that, and you create that rev share.
So then the obvious question is, that's what you think the future of this stuff is? Like these guys, why aren't they doing that? You think they're too standoffish still?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% PR, right? At this point, we have conversations with the brands at the highest level, and everybody inherently agrees that secondary market's not going anywhere. We have to figure out how to work with them. But they're still going to be slow and methodical and careful about how they do that. And rightfully so. Like, I don't blame them for that, because you have 30 years of bad PR. Anytime you've ever had violence around sneakers, anytime you've ever had, I mean, it's all.
But this eliminates that.
It does. And there's a lot of it, right? But it's just, and that's okay. But so this gets to the idea. So today we're better secondary market for certain products, again, finite supply in that world. Then we become an alternate, retail channel where we can link with the brands and literally IPO products. And so I don't know if you saw, so 3 weeks ago we did our first IPO or big IPO at scale.
I saw are you talking about the Ben Baller thing? I saw that. Yeah.
So, on one hand, it's like a pair of slides with Ben Baller. It's kind of, like a joke, right? But it's not. Like, the product is almost irrelevant to the process. We sold 800 pairs of slides. It was red and black. There was like twice as many black as were red. And it was a true IPO. It was a blind Dutch auction, right? Which I'll walk through how that works. But this is how stocks and stuff are priced when they go into the market, which is, it's a method of allowing the market to set the price. And so the slides, they would have retailed for $70 maybe, if they weren't retail. And who knows what they would have resold for if they just went into the market that way. But they cleared at an average of $200 a piece. And then the second that the IPO was over and people paid $200 a piece, we turn on the secondary market and people were selling them for $350. And so this is the macroeconomic theory of a blind Dutch auction. So I'll run through real quick the simplest version. So what you do is you tell everyone how much quantity is available. So let's say black size 9, there's 20 pairs of black size 9 that are available. Everybody bids blind, whatever you want to bid, whatever you want. You don't have any context. There's no, you got to bid more to win this auction, just whatever you want to bid. And the top 20 people win. And let's say the 20th person, the number one, the highest bid $1,000. And let's say the 20th person, right, bid $300, right? And then, everyone's below $300. So the top 20 win. But what happens is the 20th price, if there's 20 available, that's the clearing price. And so everybody pays the clearing price. So even if you bid $1,000 at number one, you pay $300. And what that does is it creates it makes sure the people that were willing to pay the most get it. These are the 20 people that bid the most. But everyone's getting the same thing, so you don't want to sell a different price for different things. Like, what is that?
And it kind of allows you to find the true demand price from scratch.
It's exactly. And Google was one of the first companies to use this in commerce. This is traditionally used in in finance and stocks and all that. Google, when they started AdWords, the way they would sell the AdWords is basically it was a Dutch auction where whoever bid the most got it, but they paid whatever the second highest person got it, right? And what it does is it prevents like you from feeling like an asshole of like, oh, I bid $1,000 for this word, and the next person bid $50 and like, oh crap, right? You're willing to pay the most, so you still get it, but and that's what this is the, and again, this gets back to like, we didn't make this up, we just followed the way that things work really well. And so the theory and the way the Ben Baller IPO played out was unbelievable. It was perfect. And we can use this to go back to brands, and we've been doing this for the last couple of weeks to say, listen, this is how this worked. And it's awesome, and here's why, it was better for the brand, it was better for the customer. Because think about it, that customer, 19 of those 20 people all got that slide for less than what they were willing to pay. So they're all happy. And by the way, then you turn on the secondary market, and then they can flip it for more even if they want to. So,
but for a brand or an influencer like Ben, the marketing is just priceless. Right? So is that one of the biggest ways that you would see that like the Nikes and the brands of the world could benefit from the platform?
That's the future of this, right? It's doing IPO with brands.
Like the Travis Scott Air Force One should be released this way.
Anything that that you have these were $400, but they retailed for $150, and that's just a broken system, right? And to your point, it's like, you know, the brands don't want to charge $400. They don't want to make more. They like all the hype that happens to go in there. So if you run an IPO, if you use a blind Dutch auction, you're able to get more money, right? If these would have cleared at, I don't know, $250.
Yeah.
And Nike would have gotten $250 instead of $150. So they would have been happy. They would have gotten more money.
Yep.
Everyone that got them would have been getting them for less than what they bid. So they would have been happy. It still would have been less than market.
Yep.
Right. So it really is a win-win. It's a massive shift from what's going on now. And so we don't expect it tomorrow with sort of mass adoption to do this and brands to roll out and test. But for us, and this is what, you know, I said I started this, is that I'm a salesman. I spend a lot of time talking to press and interviews. I do a lot of public speaking. And the last is talking to brands about this idea of like working with the secondary market, IPOing shoes, getting into this, you know, and getting rid of these old world like constructs around retail price or retail resale or whatever it is. Like, no, there's one market. It's about true market value, like, and the rest of it is just nonsense. It's antiquated shit, right? The stock market, there's one price for a share of Nike stock, right? There's not a retail price for it. No, like what it's trading at $72, and that's what we buy it at. That's it. So that's the big idea. And by the way, what happens after that? What happens after that is then people can literally buy and sell shoes without ever taking possession of them, right? Like, and we've done some of these. So we did our first IPO, small quantity. We did 46 pairs. When Nike released the Air Zoom Generation, LeBron's first shoe, they re-released it in January of 2017. And we created a sneaker box made out of wood from the Cavaliers championship court and included in the box an actual Cavs championship ring. It's fucking crazy, like, marketing thing. But we did a blind Dutch auction, and it was only 46 pairs. So they sold for like $6,000 a piece. But what was extraordinary about this one was after the IPO cleared, there were 7 of these people that wanted to resell those packages after they got it from us. And we enabled them to resell it without ever taking possession.
So you could really be like a stock trader, but like Benjamin Kicks in the future will just be like, you won't even have to have inventory.
Exactly. This is like commodity, like true, like oil trade. Like when you buy or sell oil futures, those barrels of oil really do sit in a warehouse somewhere. They don't send them to your house and then you ship them back through UPS. No, like you just trade them digitally. Like that's what was happening. And we don't do that at scale yet, but we will. We 100% will. Like that's the future of this. So the 3 layers of the business are: today we're a better secondary market, and we have a long way to go to sell more and handbags and watches and you know, TV commercials and all that. Then there's become an alternate retail channel where you IPO products. And then there's literally just a day trading thing that happens on top of it. Just like oil future. The only difference is someone somewhere in that chain eventually says, I would like to own those Jordans. Please send them to me. Right. Otherwise, it's all the same thing. So everything that happens in the actual stock market, like, should be able to happen here. Right? And that's like the big idea. So
that's amazing. And then to that point, like in, let's say, 5 years, what does the product on StockX look like? Like, is it still majority like, you know, sneakers and bags? And it's obviously always going to be sort of these finite items that are in high demand. It still looks like that. It's just much more integrated with the brands and that sort of. Is that how it looks to you?
I think so. You know, the next product category that we'll open up probably sometime this year is art. So not like unique fine art, one-of-a-kind stuff, but things that are serialized. So art prints, collector toys, bear bricks, cause companions, skate decks, like street art, right? So you start to get, again, these things that have the same dynamics, which is finite supply, lack of transparency, lack of authenticity, like that. So we'll continue to add that, but then you also get into possibly like discounting and the flip side of that. Right, so, you know, it's middle of winter everywhere except for LA. It's the middle of winter, so, you know, so T-shirts are 40% off on Nike.com or whatever, right? But why are they 40% off? Nike, it's just an arbitrary number for Nike to try to clear through inventory. If you had a bid-ask model, if you understood demand, if you use the StockX process, some people might bid 10% off, some people might bid 20% off, and you could get to what is the true market value for this product. It's not, it's going to be less than retail, but it's not necessarily 40% less. Like, what's the true market value? This whole thing is just a pricing mechanism, right? It's a variable pricing mechanism that moves real time with the market. And the more that the brands are open to using that, the better you should be able to get from a pricing standpoint. And those are all the products that we sell.
Amazing. And I'm not asking you to say anything negative about your competitors, but back to my original like question, one of the first couple questions I asked, everyone else is just a platform, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I think if we had a different goal, we might look more like some of our competitors. I think some of them have built really good businesses. They're just running the traditional models, right? And that's okay, right? Like whether it's a consignment or an eBay model or a auction model or whatever it is, like there's a lot of products that still should be sold that way.
Yeah.
And do that, and I'll give you the sort of the best example is so Grailed, which I like and I buy stuff off Grailed. Grailed is essentially the eBay model. And it's great if you want to find some rare thing. But the day that we added streetwear, we took some large percentage of their Supreme business that I'm sure they weren't happy with, because fundamentally that product is just better sold on using the model that we use. Now, there's a lot of product that they will continue to sell that will never work for us, and that's okay. So we should be somewhat symbiotic. But having all brand new Supreme go through StockX rather than Grailed was probably a pretty big hit for them. But that's just the nature of it. Like that product works better for this model. And there's something else that they should sell.
And that's interesting too, because you're saying that a lot of these platforms can coexist. Like I always thought about it like one person's going to win and the rest are going to die. But you don't really see it that way.
That's certainly sort of historically how we think about marketplaces. But I think that's right at a product level, right? Like, like I said, for brand new Supreme product, we should be, we are the leader, but like at some point, like that just becomes, you take larger and larger market share of that, that you couldn't survive if that was your whole business. But like I said, we'll never sell the majority of the products that Grailed sells. And that's okay. That's just a different product, and they can own that part of it. So.
And it seems like the person in the most danger here is Foot Locker. I mean, do you think that this is a case of like things just evolved and that model didn't, and just the basic model is very broken? And
well, what's tough is, and for Foot Locker and all retailers, is they get it on both sides, right? Because as the brands go more direct to consumer, right? And that's ultimately their biggest threat, because Nike, right? They're Nike. They can sell everything direct to consumer if they want. And there's still a lot of products that they like having Foot Locker and boutiques and retailers be their showroom, so Nike doesn't have to have physical stores. But it's tough when, whatever percentage business the brands took away from the Foot Lockers of the world by going direct to consumer, and then you combine that with, and it's not only StockX, but other resale platforms, that the way that we grow is by taking that retail customer, because we've made it easier and more accessible for that retail customer, who bought their last pair of shoes at Foot Locker or Nike.com and never would have tried to wade through eBay 3 years ago or buy shoes off Facebook groups or something, right? But now, they have a little bit more disposable income, and they want a pair of, Jordan, 1 Unions. And now they can buy it, and it's as easy to buy it off StockX. It's an e-commerce experience. It's a single product page, all those things. It's as easy as it is to buy a pair of shoes off of Foot Locker. And by the way, it's not only the rare stuff, it's also just like the back catalog. Like if you go to Foot Locker and let's say you like, I don't know, Air Max 90s, and you go to Foot Locker, maybe there's 4 colors of Air Max 90 that they're selling this week, right? There's like 60 colors of Air Max 90 on StockX. They're not extraordinarily expensive. They're probably cost the same as retail or about, but it's just having that back catalog of all of that, and all of a sudden you start to just take more of that customer, and so it's a dangerous place to be. But at the end of the day, like if they can be valuable to the brands, I think there's probably always a place for the company.
And that's kind of, that's not obviously even, like I said, a diss to them. That's the story of retail across the board. And I think that like, it seems like almost all, like it literally feels like almost all consumer goods purchases are like becoming more drop based, more moment based. You want to feel a part of a moment, no matter if you're buying your like Taco Bell, Doritos Locos, you know what I mean? Like you want to create a moment. But the other thing also that you just said that I didn't mention at all is all of that other stuff is on StockX too. Like the relatively inexpensive $80 Air Max, whatever, are there too.
And that's for us, as we grow, it's about mass market. We started running commercials, TV commercials. This year, for our core business, you know, I love talking about the future and the IPOs and all that. But for the core business, it's about creating now more mass awareness, right?
Yep.
The people within the community, you know, they know about us, and that's awesome. But it's how do you get that guy that bought their last pair of shoes at Foot Locker? And you know, at core, like we just have more to offer that customer, and it's just a function of you know, go back function of the internet, function of all of that, of being able to aggregate all that sort of stuff, and it's yeah, and so that's our goal for the core business this year is like mass awareness.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that one of the biggest like sort of hurdles? I would say it seems like convincing brands that they need to get on board here and just awareness with the consumer.
Yeah. You know, watches and bags are a good example where, you know, we've added these categories. They're a year and a half old. They don't have nearly the traction that sneakers and streetwear does. Yeah. We're not the leaders in those categories. And a lot of that is just about awareness, right? Yeah. As people know, because it just is a better model for certain products. But at the end of the day, right, if people don't know about it, if people, you know, are whatever, intimidated by the data, if people don't want to, you know, engage with it. And so there's the core business is blocking and tackling, right? It's SEO and digital marketing and brand and influencer marketing and, you know, and social and all that of like, you know, how do you really, you know, drive that? And I'm fortunate to have, you know, an amazing team. There's 650 people that work at StockX. 649 of them are at the office every day running the real business. Yeah. And I get to come and hang out with you and Ariana Grande and go talk to brands about the future of all e-commerce. Yeah. And like, you know, maybe that happens tomorrow, maybe it happens in a year, maybe it happens, but that's okay because like, you know, the real, like the core of the business is like, man, all right, like what promotions are we running this week? What are we doing on social? You know, we have a 25-person content team across the different verticals for social and blogs and all that sort of stuff. And like, that's the core of the business. And like, yeah.
That's amazing. All right. One of my last questions is usually where do you see this thing in, you know, 5-10 years, but we talked about it pretty thoroughly. So the last and final question is the classic, if you could go back in time to the childhood version of yourself, you know, early teens, loving basketball, shoes, that sort of thing. Was there anything that you would tell yourself to maybe save some time, save some wasted energy, save any of that stuff?
You know, no one had asked me that until someone asked me a version of that a couple weeks ago, and no one had asked me that.
Well, once you become really successful, people start wanting to know. That's the easy way to get right to the...
Yeah. You know, like I've made a ton of mistakes, and you learn from all those. And I don't know if you know if I would have wanted to do things differently in retrospect, right? I got really good advice during my second startup, where I was talking to a more seasoned entrepreneur, and he said, "Listen," he goes, "you know, you're now embarking on." I was about to start the second one. He goes, "You're now about to do this." He goes, "You got to think back to the stuff during the first one because there's so much that you learn in startups and business that you can't use until the next one." You know, like the sort of obvious example is like, you know, when you went to your first one, you went to design your first logo. How much money did you waste on graphic designers who were no good or processes? Like now you know how to do that, and you'll spend less money and be more efficient and get a better logo. It's a simplistic example. But there's so much of that in business that you can't learn. You can't use what you learn until later. And those mistakes are important. So I don't know if there's something that I would change. Although the one thing, and I can't change this, is I've always wished that I was born 4 years earlier or 4 years later. I graduated from college in 1995. Okay. So I missed the first like web 1.0, like, you know, all that. I was completely oblivious to all that, you know, in college, just, you know, drinking and chasing girls or whatever else you do in college, and just completely oblivious to that. And then the second one didn't start for a couple years later. And so like the first two companies I created were, they were service businesses. Like, so and this gets back to the larger thing, is I wish that I had been creating tech businesses earlier and, you know, part of that faster. And I think that could have amplified other mistakes that I've made. And, but again, like, I think that's a lot of timing. Like I was born at a certain time where I happened to hit this moment and didn't hit either of those. And I was East Coast, you know, then I went to school in the South. Like I was nowhere near the Valley or what's going on in tech and all this stuff. So there's a lot of things that just happened, but it's, those are the super interesting things to think about and look back, the sliding doors questions of like, oh, like I don't know, what if I'd gone to college in California and was like closer to the valley if like all that stuff was starting, right? I mean,
it's interesting. Once you start to wrap your head around how much those little like chance things affect, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And think of all the negative things that could have happened. But I also think to your first answer, like what a lot of people say, and unfortunately these things start to come off like cheesy when you try to package them, but it's almost like you want to like mess up quicker. You know what I mean? Like, don't hesitate. Don't mess up slowly.
Yep.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, because you learn from those mistakes. And it's like, I almost wish, because I can relate to that, I almost wish I could have packed more mistakes and learning into a shorter period of time.
Yeah. So, and in retrospect, I had a lot of good other entrepreneurs around me at different moments to advise. But that was one of the first ones that always stuck with me. It was like, fail fast.
Yeah.
Right? Fail fast, go in there, and like the second that you know that this thing can't be whatever you want it to be, like it's okay to cut ties. It's okay, and we did this on, I forget which company it was, one of the companies where like I knew that shit was not happening, and I was like, listen, we need to shut this down. And my two co-founders were like, no, like we had like, I don't know, 60 grand in the bank. Like it was like, we need to like try it. We need to pivot and make a new company. And I'm like, no, like this thing's over. I was like, you guys need to like, we move on. And they really wanted to give it a go. And I was like, okay. I was like, you can literally have my part of the equity and go for it. And I'm not going to stand in your way. I was like, but you need to do this. And 6 months later, they came like, yeah, you were right. Yeah. And did this. And failing fast is a massive, massive, like importantly thing that like people need to do.
Yeah. Huge. Listen, man, thank you so much for squeezing me in.
No problem.
This is amazing.
Thank
Keep
you.
killing it. A big fan of the whole platform and everything. Like I said, I genuinely just use it, and I'm just a big fan of what you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Guys, if you like that and you want to see more like it, as well as vlogs, other web series, and all the random stuff that I'm doing here on YouTube, don't forget to click that subscribe button. You won't regret it. I promise.